Hey there, my name is Tyler.
I'm Mary.
I'm Aaron.
And I'm Kylie.
And we'd like to invite you to join us in the Fortress of Comictude podcast, where we discuss such topics as
Creator Focus, where we pull a comic creator's name out of a bucket and talk about their history and books they've worked on.
We also do what's called the Comic Book Club, where we pick a book, read page by page, and analyze how cool it is.
And Was It Really That Bad?, where we take an old comic book movie from the past that got horrible reviews and decide if it was truly, really that bad.
Plus creator interviews, movie reviews, top 5 lists, and so much more. So join us in the Fortress of Comictude.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be
the owner of a comic book store.
Trust me, true believer. Well, Jagger and me, we had a running contest to see who had the most comic books in the world.
Whatever, my escape was comic books.
Net profit to me, negative $59.
I love the comics because of the brightness displayed by the fellows who drew them. They remain with me always. And when comic books first came into being, it drew me to them.
Tales from the Comic Shop.
Hey, and welcome to Tales from the Comic Shop, the show that takes you behind the counter. I'm your host, Joe, and today I'm joined by Eddie D'Angelini and the Nerd Dome's own Uncanny Ryab. Say hello, gentlemen.
Hello. Hey. So I'm Eddie D'Angelini. I am the co-manager, co-owner of Heidi Ho Comics and the writer, creator, artist of the comic strip Collectors.
I am the Uncanny Ryab. I am a co-host on the Nerd Dome podcast. You can find us on Facebook and wherever fine podcasts are found.
Awesome. How you gentlemen doing today with this heat? I'm sure it's plenty hot where you guys are.
I'm melting over here in Los Angeles right now.
It wasn't too excruciating here in Utah. It wasn't that bad today. It was only in the 90s.
Oh yeah. Well, It was 90 here, but it decided to rain. So it's not only hot, but humid.
That's the thing. It hit 90 over here, and you can feel the humidity, and it's all just stuck in the house. And it's it's miserable. And you'll have to excuse me, but I'm going to crack open something here to help me cool off. There we go. Nice refreshing drink.
There we go. That's the way to do it. And we're going to soldier on because that is what we do here at the podcast for you guys. So let's hop into the news. DC dropped a bombshell, an absolute bombshell over the last week and a half. This week, they announced 6 more titles were being canceled, along with the previous 6 that had been scheduled to be canceled for a little bit. Teen Titans was a casualty of it, which hurts me. Young Justice is another one. Harley was canceled, but Harley's been on the chopping block for a while because they are rebooting that series. Suicide Squad, Hawkman, Hellblazer, which I know a lot of people are very upset about. That Constantine book was very popular. Batgirl and Batman and the Outsiders. Eddie, I know you feel very strongly about this. Why don't you clue them in on your opinion?
Yeah, so I've got, first off, they're not really being very forthcoming about all the things that they're doing and why they're doing it. So us on the retailer end, even just for you people on the fan end, we have to speculate what's really going on. And I am at the point now when I read these articles, when these news stories break, I am looking beyond the article. I'm looking for what is the story behind this story, because all of these articles are starting to feel like they are conditioning us and trying to get us used to the idea of certain things so that they can make it easier to move towards the goals that they ultimately have. And by they, I'm not talking DC Comics. I'm talking about the higher ups. I'm talking about Warner Brothers, AT&T, because really, when it comes to the money, they're the ones obviously that are calling the shots. And to do a quick overview of what got us to this point before I start speculating what I think is really going on, I will kind of give you a quick overview of what has led up to this from the retailer end. This started back February, March. The first thing that happened that I can recall, Joe, you talked about this with Charles and Roger, and I experienced the same thing. There was a month of orders that we shop owners had to do where the DC magazine of all the upcoming releases for the next for the 2 months ahead of time, was not in there with the regular issue of previews that comes out every month. The Marvel one was in there and the DC one was not. Now, for people who don't really know how ordering works, we shop owners every month have to put in our initial order for all the books that we want for the shop that are coming out in 2 months. So when you go into your comic shop on a Wednesday, those books that you see on the shelf, your shop owner ordered those 2 months back. And you probably have all seen the big previews book that's available in the comic shops to buy. That's where we order from. We go through that whole book and we order all the Marvel, all the DC, all the Boom, Image, whatever, everything. That month, the separate Marvel magazine was in the big previews book, but the DC one wasn't. And DC said, oh, you know what? That was just a mistake on our end. It'll be with the next month's preview catalog. We just didn't get our information in on time for it to have it printed, to get it included, but don't worry about it. It'll be in the next one. Well, before that next one came out, it was like a week or two later that DC announced that they are no longer going to be having their DC magazine of preview magazine along with the large preview book. They're going to no longer print it anymore, and it's only going to be available online. So that was one lie. That was the first lie. They knew that they were going and moving it to digital only and not print, but they lied to all of us retailers. Then what happened was, now for me, not all shops had to close down because of the pandemic, but for me, I was one of the ones that had to close down here in Southern California. So I was closed for 2 months. And in that period of time, DC was trying to make themselves sound like the good guy by saying, well, we don't want our readers and fans to miss out. So we think that instead of trying to print the new issues that won't be able to go into shops and people won't be able to go in and buy, we're going to start making them available digitally only. And there was such outcry in the fan community of that they finally went back on that and decided not to. And then there was rumblings about them breaking away from Diamond and starting their own distribution company so that they could then distribute those books during the closures and get them out there and not have to wait for Diamond to reopen. Because for people who don't know, Diamond also decided to close. Most shops had to close for a couple months. Diamond said, we are not going to stay open and ship out books to shops that are closed and can't sell. So we are going to close as well until everyone else is open, and then we will resume. DC said, well, that's not good enough. We want to get the books out there. So what if we toy with the idea of starting our own distribution company away from Diamond during this time? And that wasn't met very well at all in any of the retailer groups online. So DC said, no, we're not going to do that. Don't worry about it. We're not going to break away. We're going to wait until Diamond opens, and then we are going to go ahead and start distributing our books through Diamond as normal. We can wait. That was the second lie, because at that time they said that they were already making their plans and laying down their foundation to distribute their books themselves. So they lied to us repeatedly, and that put a bad taste in our mouth, all of us retailers. I can't say all of us retailers, but I will say the vast majority, because in all the retailer groups on Facebook, the big ones where all the retailers talk, and the people that I talk to in person, like Roger, who's the third host of the show here, nobody was happy about it. Nobody was happy that they were saying they were going to do it, and then they did it anyway, and that we were lied to repeatedly. So they broke away, and they gave all of us retailers only 2 weeks to start an account with one of the two new distributors that they set up and get your orders in. And what I almost forgot about here was the third lie. They represented their two distributor companies, West Coast and East Coast, under two names that were totally new, that we had never heard of, us retailers, and said, well, here are our new retailing companies. It was us retailers who did the investigative work and found out that those two new retailers were Midtown Comics and Discount Comic Book Service, the two largest online retailers of comic books, which is a huge, huge conflict of interest. They tried to pass that by us and not tell us that. So it was lie after lie after lie. So a lot of us retailers just are not feeling very good about DC at the moment. But fast forward, go past all that. They set up new distributors. Now we're dealing with them. What happened now was, well, first off, the people were speculating, why did they break away? We did this on a previous show. Joe, it was you, Charles, and Roger speculating about what was behind all of this. And turns out with the news stories that have been coming out past week, I've got to say that they were dead on. This past week, first off, it was about a week and a half ago, announcement of cancellations came in.
The first announcements, about a week and a half ago. It's been about 10 or 11 days.
So they announced about 4 or 5 titles that they were canceling. Now, that's not the biggest news because, I mean, Marvel and DC, they cancel titles all the time. If the sales aren't there, unfortunately, they got to go. And then they came back a week after that and announced some more cancellations, which just was a couple days ago, which was Young Justice, Teen Titans, Suicide Squad, Hawkman, and John Constantine.
Hellblazer, yeah.
Yeah.
So are those books that aren't selling very well? Or because it seems like to me like Teen Titans is like a flagship book, or am I mistaken?
Well, I can only speak for my shop. Sure. None of those titles are big sellers for me. So hearing that they are canceled, if that alone was the story, hearing that they were canceled, not really a big deal or a big surprise for me because I know how they sell in my shop and they sell minimally. If Batman isn't in it, it just doesn't sell as far as DC titles go in my shop. So that alone isn't that shaking, earth-shattering of a news story, but it was followed basically by Jim Lee just touting digital for DC. Basically, I can paraphrase, but basically it was him saying about how it seems to be a way for them to go. It seems to be something that they want to utilize more in the future, and it's really not that bad. There's really nothing to be afraid of when it comes to digital. So that alone is kind of harking back to what Charles and Roger was saying about DC and digital, which is the higher ups, which is AT&T and Warner Brothers. They really don't see much benefit in the print side of DC Comics. For them, it's a way to create content for movie IP. And if you can figure out a cheaper way to do that, then why not just do it that way instead of wasting all this time, money, and energy putting out print comics when you can just release it digitally? We got the content we need for film and TV and whatever else that we originally bought all this IP for. We don't care about comics. They are not comic book fans. I'm speculating. This is all my speculation. I am basing this not on anything I've read or anything that someone has told me, but on just conversations I've had with other retailers, reading between the lines of a lot of these articles that are coming out, and it's what I see. And if you kind of want further evidence, I would say look at the music industry. Look at what has happened there. I mean, you had records, you had cassettes, you had CDs, and now everything is digital and streaming. Now, granted, comics are not the same because people will always want that tangible aspect of comics. Problem is, we, the reader, the consumer, we're not the ones that are controlling the direction of the industry. It's basically the corporations. And if they don't see a benefit to the print side of comics, and they can figure out a way to kind of brush it aside or minimize it for the sake of digital, they're going to do it.
I think you're spot on. I completely agree. From what I can tell, DC is going to make a big push, and they're going to try and push away from the LCS, and they're going to try and push people into the borders because they can print OGNs, and they have the whole process with books it's much easier for retailers to hit and miss with orders because of how they can return, but it's also more profitable for the distributors as well because with periodicals you have all sorts of other issues that come into play, and when they're collectible periodicals, now condition matters, and that makes comics very, very hard to profit on as a distributor.
Also, the idea of a 22-page single floppy comic book, the profit margin for AT&T, Warner Brothers, even us, the comic shop, is minute compared to the profit margin on a trade paperback or an original graphic novel.
Absolutely. Here's the thing that I don't think that the people at Time Warner and AT&T and these larger companies understand about the comic community is the LCS is a community. It's a place where we gather. I mean, you can see it with cons. We're a community, and we're not going to just chase these characters. We're not going to abandon our community to chase these characters into borders.
I agree with you. The problem, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Finish your thought, and then I'll rebut.
Well, I think that what that means is I think this is going to be like when Marvel tried to self-distribute 20 years ago. This is going to be an experiment that's coming from a guy coming from a guy in an office with a tie who crunches numbers but doesn't know anything about the community. And as a result, it's going to be an experiment. It's going to fail miserably, and we're going to see DC moving back to the status quo in 18 months. That's just my opinion.
I don't think that there is going to be a status quo for them to go back to. I'll say that you're both right and you're both wrong, and this is why. Marvel, when they tried to distribute their books themselves, it didn't work because they came to the quick realization that they're not a distributor. They're a content creator. They write and draw stories. They're not a shipper, and they don't have the wherewithal to concentrate on that side of it when they really should be concentrating on writing, drawing, editing, and getting these stories out. Now, in the case of DC, they're not doing that. They're outsourcing it. They're outsourcing it to someone who is already doing that. That's their main focus of existence, to fill orders and ship them. Because Midtown and Discount Comic Book Service, that's what they do. They are an order shipping fulfillment service. You order something from them, and they ship it out to you. And in this case, it's just the comic shops ordering all their stuff, and them pulling it and them shipping it out to you. So it's not quite the same in that case.
No, I understand that, but I don't see those. I don't believe that distribution deal is going to last because of the fact that they're so interested in moving to borders and digital. I think in Amazon,
it will last. No. It will last, and I'll tell you why.
So?
The point I was going to make earlier was they don't give a what about the mom and pop comic shop, because we order a few $1,000s worth of these books a month from them, as opposed to Midtown, who orders huge amounts of inventory from them.
Well, I understand, but Eddie, they shut down the toy section of DC during the bloodbath.
They did.
And
toys
if they're
do not
going
create
strictly digital and OGN, what are they going to order? Are they going to order 3,000 copies of Action Comics and Detective Comics because they can't shut those down because they're 100-year or an 80-year-old institution?
I don't have an answer to that because I don't really know for sure how they really see their end game. And I don't even know if they see their own end game. All I can see is Warner Brothers, AT&T, they bought this company, DC Comics, for the IP, for the movie IP, because that's where the money is.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And there's no disputing that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And in
100%.
in order to have the content you need for film and TV, you still need the writers and the artists creating that content and putting it out. So
yeah, absolutely.
For them, but I don't even think that they are looking far enough ahead to see that if we just do it digitally, that there's going to be an outcry from the fan community that they can't get their print comics. Because to us, we're just a tiny little insignificant, annoying ant.
I understand. See, we're 100% on the same page, but here's the here's the thing. I think that the fan base is loyal to the shops and to the community, and because I mean, like going to the shop and seeing my comic people and having our discussions every week that we have, that's a big part of being a collector. You eliminate that. You eliminate that by moving to OGNs in a bookstore and digital as your main source of output. Marvel and Image and Boom and IDW, they're all still going to be. I'd say Dynamite, but Dynamite's not going to be there anymore. That's all still going to be in the LCS, and that's where the people are going to be there. And so when DC loses 90% of their market share, to make these IP farms relevant, they still need new material to be created. So they're going to have to make a decision. Do we shut down the comic division entirely? Because even with DC's huge market share, what are they, 40%?
About.
Yeah, they're 40%, I believe, around there. They're you cut that down to 5%, 4%. They're not going to be able to maintain a creative company on those margins. I agree
with you. I absolutely agree with you.
They're going to have to come back to the mom and pop shops.
They're going to have to do something. But see, the way that they're going to come back is not by just going back to the status quo. I think you, Roger, and I kind of bantied this around, and I can completely see them saying, well, we're just going to, farm out these characters to a different publisher to have them do it because we don't want to do it. Where I think that maybe what I think you're not considering is that for all the other companies like Marvel, Image, IDW, Boom, any of them else, they all get it, because I guarantee you that the higher ups in those companies, they frequent comic shops pretty regularly. They know what the community is like. They know what they're thinking. They get it. Now, the higher ups in AT&T, Warner Brothers, I guarantee you, these are people that have probably never even stepped into a comic shop. They have no clue what the community is like. So they have no clue what they're stepping into when they are trying to push to a more online sales model or a digital sales model to get the content made so they can have it for IP and not have to deal with the headache and the cost and the expense of printing these comics every week, which is to them is a pain in the butt. It's like, why are we doing this? We're not making money on these. We barely break even, and for us shops, we pretty much barely break even too selling these. So what the point I'm trying to make is they don't get it. They don't understand the way you're explaining it because you go to a comic shop regularly, or the people higher up in Marvel, or even people higher up in Disney. They get it. I
guarantee you that Disney's going to be watching this very carefully because it's going to be interesting. It could go a lot of ways. I just personally have to believe that what I said will happen is just my vision going forward, because I want there to still be print comic books in 10 years.
And I'm sure there will be.
Oh yeah.
I don't think that's going to stop. Even for DC, I agree with you that this move, this whatever that they're pushing towards, because like I say, I feel like all these articles that come out that drop this little bit of news, and you see Jim Lee here touting digital and basically saying it's not that bad. All of these articles, you read between the lines, because these articles feel like we are being conditioned to accept something that is coming, and that they're trying to basically kind of ease you into it with all of these things that have been happening. New distributor, new this, digital's not so bad. These titles are canceled. We're going to push this here. It feels like we are being slowly conditioned to accept something that they've got planned, that they've got coming, that they think is going to benefit them and save them money. And that, like you're saying, Joe, is going to blow up in their face, and that they're going to end up, I don't think once it blows up in their face, I honestly don't think they are going to be in the position to say, oh, let's just go back to the way it was, because the model is going to be too destroyed. They are then going to do the DC Jim Shooter 1980s thing where they're going to say, well, why don't we give the rights to this company to publish these characters? And then we'll just keep an editorial staff. The writers and the artists will be freelance, and the editorial will take care of it. We'll still own the rights to these characters and the IP and the content, but we're going to let them create it and them put it out.
And honestly, if that's the fallout, I wouldn't be that mad about it, because at least then I feel like the stories will be coming from creators. Yeah.
Well, you'll still have DC Comics, and you'll still have the editorial staff that are heading up the stories and the direction of the content and where things are going and what events are happening and stuff like that. It's just going to be, when it comes out, it's going to basically have like a little DC IDW logo in the top corner instead.
Yeah.
And it'll still look the same, but it'll just not quite be exactly the same.
No, I hear you. And the other thing that's worrisome about that is something about a big comic world that we've discovered over and over again through the history of comics is, whether it's Marvel or DC, when you have this big, or Valiant, whatever, this big giant extended universe, you need to have someone at the top of the food chain who can put these stories and connect them all together at the end of the day. Because when DC's at its best, it's when they've had someone, whether you have Jeff Loeb or a Dan DiDio at the top of DC's at its best. And I know people were terrified of 5G and they're all mad at Dan DiDio, but you know what? When he went, I saw this all coming, because he was the last guy in the executive pool who was really fighting for the mom and pop shops.
Yeah. And all of this happened, all of this started breaking and changing when he left.
Yes. Now, I really, real quick, want to say we are not unsympathetic to all the people at DC and DC Universe who lost their jobs last week. We definitely are sorry about that. We feel bad for you guys. We're thinking about you, and we know we'll see you on
personal
new
friends
products.
who are affected.
Yes, we know we'll see you guys on new creative projects coming forward in the future, because as everyone knows, you don't get in the comic industry for the money. You do it because you love the stories and the characters and the comics. And
now
all those people will bounce back.
In conclusion, I'm very kind of heated up about all of this, as you can tell, because like I said, I see higher ups in the side of DC Comics who are making decisions based on finances, based on film and TV, and not based on the fans, the love of comics, or anything like that. That is what I think is the norm happening in the other companies. I mean, yes, Disney owns Marvel, but Disney is not an unsympathetic corporation to Marvel in that sense. I think that they get it, that there is a fandom for Marvel and those characters that runs through not just the films, but all the way down to the mom and pop shops and the print comics, because Disney itself is a fandom. And you can walk into, if you ever go to Disneyland, which you guys aren't in California, so perhaps not, but if you go to Disneyland and you go to downtown Disney and all the shops, every single one of them, you can buy Marvel comics. So they're all about the print. So they're all about print Marvel comics. So in the respect of all the other publishers, they're being backed up by the people on top that may or may not own them. In DC, I just don't see that. And if people think that what I'm saying sounds completely crazy about what I think their end game is and what I think might happen as far as it blowing up in their face and other companies like maybe IDW or Boom or somebody else publishing Batman or so on, if you think that sounds crazy, go do a Google search for what happened in the 80s when DC almost sold all of their characters and publishing rights to Marvel. Because there was a point where DC realized we're not doing really well with these characters. We're not really making money with them. Marvel knows what to do. They make money. Why don't we sell the rights to these characters to Marvel and let them publish them? It almost happened back then in the 80s. So it's not that crazy.
All right. Well, moving on, what we are going to talk about today is a very interesting topic. We're going to talk about the history of identity politics in comics. And the reason you might know the phrase identity politics is because it's become very in vogue for a certain group of comic fans to scream about how new comics are all about identity politics and that it's just ruining the genre and ruining the industry, and they can't stand to read anything because it's all just SJW, identity politics, liberal crap. And
just the new books, the new phenomenon that's just barely happening in the past few years. Just the new
yes. We'll give them the last decade because I think that their group kind of started around 2010. But yeah, regardless, it's all a bunch of just crap. And it's very important that we work as a community to dispel this notion because, for one, it's important for people to have representation in comics. And we're going to prove that in the conversation we're about to have. But also, it is important for the stories, because if you don't have politics and you don't have identities and you don't have different types of people coming together to solve problems or work against each other, what you end up with is perspectiveless crap. On every level, this is important to push back against.
You said it perfectly. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Well, let's tell them why. Like Ryan was just saying, they have said that in the last decade, comics have become overrun by the liberal media agenda. And that's just flat out wrong. Eddie, why don't you tell them about Superman, a little character from the 1940s they might have heard of, and what he represented?
Yeah, I think most people might have heard of him. I think he's somewhat of a popular character. Well, basically, as far as all these people saying that this has been overrun in the comic industry in the last 5-10 years, that is completely false, because it was there from the very beginning and has been there all through to the present. It was evident in the creation of Superman, which was created by two Jewish writer-artist team, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. And they basically created this character. First off, if you go back and you read those early stories from the 1940s, Superman was the ultimate social justice warrior. I mean, that was the whole point of him as a character. This was a character that stood up for the little guy always. This was a character that fought slumlords for taking advantage of the people who lived in their buildings. This is a character that fought war profiteers, took advantage of people who were basically drafted to fight into wars they didn't believe in. This was a character that beat up husbands who beat up their wives. So he was the ultimate social justice warrior. And this goes beyond Superman, because pretty much almost every superhero that was created at the time was created either knowingly or unknowingly as a propaganda tool for what might be considered very leftist views. Captain America, obviously, is the ultimate in that. So another thing of note for the Golden Age is obviously Wonder Woman. Now, everyone knows Wonder Woman. Everyone just associates her as like the Trinity character for DC, but they don't realize that she was written as a very strong feminist character and created by a man who was a very strong feminist. You should note the fact that this was being written at a time where women were not thought of this way. And the creator was, Wonder Woman was very, very progressive, his opinion of women, and he portrayed that through the character. So from the Golden Age to the Silver Age, a very interesting story that a lot of people don't know. We take it for granted that there are a lot of Black characters in comics now, but where it started was not very pretty. Everyone thinks that, Black Panther was the first Black character. Not true. Black Panther was the first superhero character, but there was a character 6 months previous to that called Lobo. And Lobo was a comic printed by Dell Comics. And the first issue came out the end of 1965. And it was actually, the comic was titled Lobo, and it was a Western series, not a superhero series. It was a Western series, and it was the first comic book where the main character was black. And Lobo was a black cowboy Western character. It was very groundbreaking at the time, obviously, because there had never been before that a black character that was the main character in the comic, and the comic was literally named after him. And it didn't really go over very well. There were only 2 issues of Lobo ever printed, and only one, the first issue, was ever even distributed. The story goes, sadly, that the first issue was distributed to newsstands all around the country. And unfortunately, the people running the newsstands did not like the fact that there was a black character, main character in this comic, portrayed right there on the cover. And majority of these comics, unfortunately, were returned unsold. They were returned, not even opened. You've probably seen how magazines or newspapers get delivered to newsstands. They come in the little plastic, in a bundle that are kind of secured with the little plastic tie things, whatever. They were returned completely unopened, not even touched. They refused to sell it at all. And so from a collecting standpoint, though, that first issue goes for a lot of money because it is so tough to find. And it's definitely one of my holy grails. The second issue, if you could even find a copy, goes for even more money because it was never distributed. So from a collector standpoint, it's like an amazing story because these 2 comics are like holy grails. But it's sad to think that in 65, the majority of people who sell comics and newspapers were not ready or happy to put out a comic book with a main character that is a black cowboy or black anything, which is sad. And it wasn't until 6 months later in 66 where Black Panther debuted in the Fantastic Four. Now, obviously, that went over a little easier because this was a character who was not the main character of the book. So it was able to get through. But the thing that is noteworthy is the fact that, obviously, everyone's seen the movie, everyone knows the character. This was a character who was a king of a country who was that was far more advanced than any other country on the planet. So that's kind of interesting to see that a black person was in that role. And then you had 3 years after that, Falcon was introduced in Captain America. And the thing that's noteworthy about that, and these were all things that were mostly Stan Lee or Stan Lee Jack Kirby creation collaboration. So these were 2 very liberal creators that spearheaded a lot of this. And when the Falcon was introduced in Captain America, everyone took it as, oh, Captain America has a new sidekick. When the truth is, from Stan Lee's own mouth, Falcon was never Captain America's sidekick. Falcon was always Captain America's partner. He was always his equal, and he always wrote him as that. So it's interesting to note that in the 60s, there were creators at Marvel. You had Stan Lee, you had Jack Kirby, you had others too, that were very progressive and were very aware of what they were portraying and how they were putting it out there with these characters. And they really wanted to show a side of humans that we all need to aspire to.
How long after Falcon did Power Man come along?
Power Man didn't come along until the early 70s. Now, I think with Power Man, and I think it's the same thing with Shang-Chi, which also came about in the mid-70s, they weren't written by Stan Lee.
They're I think both of those books are kind of a result of exploitation movies too, like the rise of the black exploitation and kung fu movies.
Yes, very, very much so. Exactly. Iron Fist, you can throw that in as well. But what's of note with Shang-Chi and Power Man is obviously you had a black character and you had an Asian character. And I think with those 2, if you go back and you read those now, they're very cringeworthy because you had basically white, suburban, middle-class males writing these books about the Black experience or about the Asian experience. And it didn't go over too well. But I will say that I think in their case, in Marvel's case, I think that their hearts were in the right place. I think that just over time, when you look at it, it didn't quite hit the mark.
No, I agree. And also another good example is the Lois Lane, the issue of Lois Lane, where Lois Lane goes undercover as a black woman and Superman puts her in a chamber and transforms her into a black woman.
Because Superman, for some reason, just happens to have this chamber in his Fortress of Solitude. Because apparently this comes up a lot that he has to have it.
It's very, the portrayal of black people. I understand the Jewish writing staff at DC at the time, what they were shooting for. But when you go back, I mean, the portrayal of black men and women in that book, it's just awful. I mean, everyone's a militant revolutionary. They have a daycare that's held in an abandoned lot next to a tenement building. I mean, it's a real.
It's because you had people who don't know the black experience in America,
yes.
Or even the Asian experience in America, or any experience in America of someone different than yourself. Because these were basically white men who just knew other white men and worked with other white men and wanted to say, yes, we're sympathetic to your plight and we're going to try to do something about it. But we don't really know enough about it to make this convincing. So now it just comes across very condescending and very hackneyed, which it does when you go back and read it.
And then one more thing I want to touch on real quick before we jump into the X-Men. You were telling me about the Howling Commandos and Percival Pinkerton, and was he the first gay character in a Marvel comic?
Unknowingly, yes. Now, people who have never read the original Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos books, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, when they created the book, were very adamant about portraying their war experience, more so Kirby than Stan Lee, because Stan Lee served stateside as opposed to Kirby, who actually saw war action. But they wanted to create a book that had a true feeling of the war experience, which is you take people from all different parts of the country, all different cultures and diverse upbringings, and you put them together in a squad, and you suddenly have all these different people who have to work together. And that's what you had with the Commandos, because you had people of different, very diverse casts, different ethnicities, and different genders in this case, all together as a family. I mean, you had Gabe, who was a black man. You had Dino, Italian guy from New York. You had Dum Dum, who was he Irish? I don't remember now. I don't have it in front of me, so I can't pick it. I can't remember exactly who everyone was. But you had another one by the name of Percival Pinkerton, who was an English soldier who rarely ever carried a gun, but would outsmart and outtalk and outfight people with his umbrella, which is kind of funny. And his sexuality was never talked about in the book, ever. But there were like little snippets here and there of people saying, oh, look at him, the cute little English soldier, whatever. And at that time, nobody caught on. It just flew under everybody's radar. And it wasn't until later years when Stan had talked about that character and he basically said, oh yeah, he was, he's totally gay. It was just totally obvious. How could you not tell? So I could probably with all confidence say that, yes, he was probably the first gay character in Marvel Comics without it ever being said or even acknowledged.
This is going to bring us to the most obvious example of identity politics in comics up to this era, the X-Men. And Ryan, why don't you tell us about the X-Men?
So the story that Stan Lee likes to tell is that he was being lazy him and Jack Kirby, they were tired of coming up with these crazy origin stories. So they're like, why don't we just have them born this way? And then that evolved into this mutant metaphor that became a really universal translation into any minority stand-in. You can put racial stories behind it, and sexual orientation stories behind it, and any other oppressed or marginalized or any other minority group, and they can be a pretty good stand-in for that. So you have these people that are born different, and they're into a society that hates and fears them, but then they choose to go and fight for that society and try to make the world a better place.
Kind of funny how that mirrors a lot of what a lot of other minorities seem to be doing right now. They're hated and feared, but yet they're still fighting to make the world a better place.
It's the only world they got.
Yeah.
So growing up, I mean, that was always a really cool thing for me to see, knowing that I was a little bit different and couldn't quite put my finger on it at the time. But that always resonated with me. And you had this group of people that were, whether you were like someone that was bullied or someone that was otherwise outcast, this group of people, this found family kind of thing that always fascinated me. So yeah, that always resonated with me as a kid, growing up and then coming out as gay, being able to have that kind of thing to fall back on and frame of reference to view the world, being like, well, even though there are jerks out there are people out there that don't respect your rights or whatnot, there are still other people in this world, and you can still do what you can do to make a difference and make the things better.
And that's, I think what you're really saying is that's why representation is so important.
Oh, absolutely. What you just said right now is literally probably the most human thing about the X-Men. Every time I watch a lot of documentaries, and there are times where certain times in documentaries, like one I watched recently, where I think to myself, that's just like the X-Men. An example is I was watching a documentary about the music scene of New York City in the late 1970s, specifically 1977. And at that point, you had like pretty much the birth of disco, the birth of punk, and the birth of hip hop all in one year. And there was one person that they were interviewing who went on to be a pretty influential writer and artist. And he had told a story about he grew up outside of New York, realized at a young age he was gay, came out to his parents, and was immediately ostracized by them. He had nowhere to go. And he basically hopped on a train to New York City and found what was an emerging club, disco club, that was inhabited and being run by the gay community at the time, because this was the first time in America, really, where people were starting to become openly gay and finding a place for themselves as openly gay people. And he found this group and realized there's other people just like me. I don't need to be alone. These people understand me. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that's the X-Men. Mm-hmm. That's absolutely the X-Men.
And it's crazy. To me, I mean, it's really crazy to me how people can be like, no, how they don't see representation as normal, or as representation of everything as normal, because they've only seen themselves on the screen. But imagine, I mean, for anybody who thinks that, well, why do we need that? Imagine yourself growing up, or if you were consuming all this media and you never saw anything of yourself on screen. It was always somebody else's story, something you couldn't ever relate to. And imagine how that could feel, and then growing up and coming to a point where you finally did see something on screen or in a media or in a book or in a comic or whatnot, you actually is like, wow, that is like me. And imagine having that for the first time in your adult life. Yeah. I mean, it's unfathomable for the majority of the population to think that, because they've never experienced that. They've never gone through for so long and not having a reflection or a mirror or something that they can identify with in the media that they were consuming.
I can agree with that. And I can't I can't imagine what that must feel like. I can only imagine maybe just literal sense what it must have been like, where you just spent all these years thinking you're not normal.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden you realize, no, someone comes out, someone like opening a door in a darkened room and letting you know, no, you are completely normal.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with you.
Even in my particular experience, I had a really a liberal family. They were really progressive. They were really open and loving and all that kind of stuff. I talk about how the found family thing was so cool to me, but I didn't have any really negative family experiences growing up. And when I finally came out to my mom, I was well into college. It was quite a long time, and she was always like, well, "Why did you wait so long?" And I was like, "It was always scary," even though I knew that my family would be accepting and stuff. Still, there was this hint in my mind where, well, what if it's different if it's their own kid? Because that was some stories too that you would read.
Sure.
You have this loving family, but then when it's not in my household, it's fine out there,
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of never know. And then I also grew up. Matthew Shepard was killed when I was in high school. That was super scary for me too. There was another guy that came out in high school that was beat up constantly afterward. I was like, it wasn't just my family that I was scared to come out to. It was a society as a whole. So that was all really rough, difficult and challenging to go through. But I really, the stories, and I mean, X-Men is one of the biggest ones, got me through all that. There was still hope. It gave me the hope to be like, the world will be a better place one day. And I can still, when the time comes and when I'm at the point, I can still do the things that I need to do, that I can do to help make it better. And there are other people that are out there working for it. So that it really does, the representation of those kind of things that you see helps people get through that kind of thing. Because I mean, I'm rambling.
No, honestly, you're not
good.
rambling at all. You're making us emotional. It is so good to hear that these characters that we all know could mean so much to somebody and could get them through something so difficult. Not that your upbringing was difficult, but you have to face a world where you are not thought of so kindly. Definitely in certain areas of this country, you are not liked just simply because of your orientation and not because of who you are as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you have characters that can help you through that and guide you through that. And that alone just makes what we do, this whole love of comic books, worthwhile.
For sure. And the community that comes up, that's what also makes me so sad that there's a fraction of any community that disagrees with, that are wrong essentially. But the fact that this community does overall really embrace that kind of stuff, and I can come onto a podcast, I can go to a Comic-Con, Wasatch Comic-Con, they had a panel about this kind of stuff, and it was really intimidating at first and really scary for me to go out and talk about that kind of stuff, because I do get a little emotional about it, and sometimes that kind of breaks through when I'm trying to talk and get a little embarrassed about it. But it's difficult for me to even today to put myself out there in certain cases because of that possible backlash. But the community as a whole is so inclusive and so loving and that kind of stuff. And I think it's part of a lot of the way that we consume that media kind of shaped the way we view the world in a lot of ways. And this community kind of shares a similar shaping of that moral compass or paradigm that you look through that was framed by these comic book stories, I think helps a lot.
Yeah. And for the people that constantly say stuff like, well, why do you got to make my character gay? And someone like you can look at them and say, because me reading about what they are going through helps me realize that what I'm going through may not be so bad. And I'm not such a horrible person for being the way I am. And that I can live my life as a happy person and know that I'm okay.
Exactly.
I'm just not alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's just exactly what I was trying to say in a roundabout way. I'm not alone.
And it's fascinating to me that we've come so far in some aspects of
Mhm.
this in the last 20 years in particular. Like, I graduated in 2000, so I'm old. But in the 90s,
Huh.
you couldn't even imagine seeing. What was the shit? Not Dharma and Greg.
Will and Grace.
Will and Grace.
Will and Grace, and that was the only gay characters that I remember being exposed to through major media.
Thing that as far as celebrities or TV shows or stuff like that coming out, ones that really resonated with me, Ellen. I really liked that show when she came out on her show. Her character came out, and then she came out in real life, and her actual self being gay.
Yeah,
that resonated with me a ton. And these are the moments stuck out with me because I was that close to coming out to my mom at those moments, being like, "Hey, that's me too." When Rosie O'Donnell came out and being gay, that was really impactful to me because I really liked her. Will and Grace was a really good show. Yeah, as those kind of things happened, and I got to consume that media and kind of have that, it created talking points and moments to kind of contextualize and bring some of those conversations out to my family and kind of help slowly build that kind of thing. After I came out in Glee, I can't say enough awesome things about Glee as far as other media. The relationship between the character Kurt and his dad, my mom and I had tons of really awesome, deep conversations and made some connections about that. And it totally helped her understand, even though she was the supportive mom, and Kurt's dad's super supportive too. And to have that's still that difficulty there and the fear there, that was super helpful to contextualize that. And that's one other thing that representation does, is it gives you a frame to talk about that kind of stuff, where you might not have that.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's just
this is getting way heavier than I thought. And I gotta no, in a good way, Ryan. I gotta say, I am so glad that you're on the show right now, because hearing your personal experiences tied in with not just characters in TV or celebrities, but obviously the X-Men characters as well, helps people like Joe and I to see this in a completely different light. Like, when someone would say, well, why do you got to make a character gay? And my answer would always be like, well, why not? Who cares? What is it to you? But now the answer is more, because this could actually save the life of somebody out there in the Midwest who is too afraid to come out to their parents, or too afraid that they're going to get beat up in school if they act, too effeminate or anything like that. And yeah, because that could save a life. That could help someone realize I'm normal. That's why.
Absolutely.
So I've never thought of it from your perspective, and hearing it firsthand just makes me realize there's so much more.
Sure. That's one of the, even though it's hard, and even though to put yourself out there, that's one of the great things about podcasting too, is that you give the different perspectives and the different kind of things that you can go and listen to that you won't find in common media, you won't find anywhere else.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, speaking and sharing these experiences is like one of the best things we can do to give that different perspective, and to give that empathy and the human compassion towards these kind of things, even though, like, don't mess with my characters, don't mess with my TV.
Mm-hmm.
This is why, and this is how important that is.
But also, as far as representation goes, there's kind of maybe a little bit of a kind of a more basic, more lighter side to it, where if you make, we want to make characters that represent certain diverse aspects of the population, because that could get them into reading comics. Sure. Whereas before, they probably never would, because, why would they want to read about some, white, straight superhero that they have nothing in common with? And where I'm going with this is a story that I love, that I always tell in my shop. My wife and I were working one day, and a father with his daughter came in, and it was a black father with his young black daughter. And I don't know how familiar you are with the new Marvel series. I don't. It's not running anymore, but Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever seen the comic, the Moon Girl is a young black girl, and they draw her with like the two big, ponytails on each side, the two pigtails on each side. And my wife went over to talk to the daughter, and because the dad was looking through the comics and picking the stuff he wanted, and the daughter just looked bored out of her mind. So my wife goes over to talk to her, and the first thing she says is, she says, "Hi, my name's Kristen. What's yours?" And so on. I said, "You know what? You look just like Lunella." And the girl looks at her like, "What?" Says, "You look just like Lunella. She's the character in this comic book, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. And she is the smartest person in the Marvel Universe. And she's a young black girl that looks just like you. And she is not only is she the smartest character in the universe who builds all kinds of great contraptions, but she has a pet dinosaur that does everything that she says." And she shows her the comic book and opens it up, and the little girl's face just lights up, and she takes the comic and runs to her dad and says, Daddy, look, she looks just like me. She looks just like me. And that right there tells you that representation is important, because you're going to get people who may not otherwise see themselves in a character. They will, and they may be more apt to not just pick up a comic and start reading, but start a lifelong love of comics. Mm-hmm. And in that case, my wife gave her a couple of the issues and said, I want you to have these as my gift to you. And I want you to promise that you're going to take them home and that you're going to read them. And the next time you come, I want you to tell me all about it. And I like to think that little girl now probably digs through her dad's comic books because she wants to read more stuff all the time.
That's awesome.
It's hard to find representation for everybody. It's getting better. I guess let's talk about North Star and Iceman, and then eventually Safe Space and Snowflake. So, were you aware of North Star when Alpha Flight was big, Ryan?
Yeah. So I'm a little OCD when it comes to comic stuff. So I'm X-Men fan all the way, but anything X-Men adjacent, I also try to consume because I want the whole story. So Alpha Flight is part of my repertoire. I really liked Alpha Flight. They were one of Wolverine's original teams. And yeah, when North Star coming out was really cool and really impactful. He was the first. He was the first gay X-Men that came out, if I think so. And yeah, he was in the X-Men book at the time, and he had this whole really cool story about him and his boyfriend, and then they actually got married, and they get married on screen or on panel. I mean, and yeah, it was super eventful and super cool, and yeah, I loved that story. North Star was a really cool character. He's like the sassy, stuck up kind of guy that has a really soft middle core to him that's really caring, but he has this like I don't give a crap about anything exterior, and it's really cool.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, the wedding was actually, the image was right there on the cover on the wedding issue.
I'm not a big Alpha Flight fan. It's just not something that I ever got into read. I mean, I like it okay. I've read a little enough, but I remember that happening, and I thought it was really cool at the time to see that. And one negative about what sucks to me is now North Star is used as like, oh, well, they have North Star, and so they don't need any more. And that makes me so irately angry every time that's thrown out there. Mm-hmm. Because no, that's not how this works. They don't just get one and you get 500. Yeah. You can have there's a billion different 7 billion different kinds of people in the world. Mm-hmm. And, that argument that, oh, well, they get North Star, it just, sorry, I had to throw that in there.
Right.
And, so, then
here's your token representation character.
Yeah, no, actually, that's funny. I remember having to explain the token joke in South Park to my friends in college because they didn't get it. Like they didn't understand that the black kid's name is Token because he's the token black character in the show. So yeah, I mean that's who but that's who you're dealing with when you're arguing with these people is cis white guys who they're just not. It's not even that they're bad people. I mean, some of them are, but some they just don't understand. They can't comprehend, like Eddie was saying earlier. So I'm really glad that we had you on to share your story because that's important to make like that a human. When you humanize an issue, it makes people understand.
Mm-hmm.
I think,
Hear, hear.
At least for me.
Yeah.
My favorite part about North Star's story when it with the marriage and his boyfriend and becoming a husband and stuff is that his boyfriend's husband's name's Kyle, and Kyle goes through this whole gets inadvertently sucked into one of the supervillain plots and gets captured and goes through this really awful experience because he's part of North Star's life now, and they have to wrestle with that and do the whole I don't know if I'm cut out for this. I don't know if I'm capable of being part of that part of your life and being put in this kind of situation. And it was really rough, and I liked that kind of story because it was something that's been told many different times in many different other comics and other contexts. But for some reason, because it was a relationship I could relate to, it really resonated more with me. And I think that's one of the illustrations of how representation has that. Because I can watch that story with a heterosexual couple and get some of it. But when it's something that's more close to home to me, like these two guys doing the same kind of thing, it just impacted me more for some reason. I was like, wow, I saw myself putting me in that situation and empathizing even more because I saw myself in those characters more than I would have a heterosexual couple.
Makes perfect sense.
I'm not super. I know about the Iceman. Can you start with the comic story about what happened with Iceman? Because I'm not super familiar.
So Iceman is a character that has been around since the Silver Age, an original X-Men #1, and he has been portrayed as a straight white male for the vast majority up until several years ago. And in the comic books, what happened is that time travel shenanigans occur, and his younger self, the younger original 5 X-Men, are transported into the future and get to coincide with their adult present day selves. And at one point, Jean Grey gets telepathy earlier on than what she did in the comics and doesn't know quite how to control it and reads Iceman's mind and then realizes that he's gay and outs him inadvertently, which then everybody turns and is like, oh, if Kid Iceman's gay, they all turn to adult Iceman. And he's like, I don't want to talk about it. Like this, like it's his worst nightmare kind of thing. And so it kind of goes on that there are these really cool stories, and my best buddy Luke gave me this issue, and it's basically Kid Iceman's first date, and some members of his team take him out and take him to a gay club, and it's just this experience that was so cool to see on the page because I know so many people that had that experience. And the first time out in the club and how the awkwardness, and it's still the awkward teen, how to flirt, how to interact with people that you're interested in, but with from the purely gay perspective. And it was just really cool because there's I loved it. And I was like, this is one of the best issues I've ever read in my life. So later on, adult Iceman, they finally have the Kid Iceman just corners adult Iceman. It's like, hey, we need to talk about this. And adult Iceman comes to terms and he's like, yeah, I am gay and I've been in the closet and hiding it and living this lifestyle forever. If you go and listen to other creators and other X-Men writers over time, said that they were always trying to go that direction. Iceman has he's a serial failed relationship with women. He dates tons of people and they always just go awry. So they kind of said that was always our game plan, but we never really went that way until they did this story. So the backlash was in real life. It's like, why are you making somebody gay? He wasn't gay before and now he is, and you can't change somebody's sexual orientation. The thing is, though, I know so many people that lived their life all the way up through into their adulthood in the closet as a straight man. They got married. They have kids. They forced themselves into this lifestyle, and it wasn't for them. And then later on, they come out. So that exact scenario exists and happens so often. And that character going through that and coming out as an adult and having to come out. Wait, I think they're aged up into their 30s now, the adult X-Men. And having to do that and be like, I've lived this lifestyle, but this is not really me, and then come out later on in life, is something that I have so many people that did and be able to be like, hey, look, this is part of your story on this page. It's really cool to show them that. And it's really cool to have the people that you have that conversation with. And I have some coworkers that are like, why are they making this person this way? And I'm like, actually, this is a real story that happens. And to help them kind of shift that kind of viewpoint and be like, that this is a real thing.
Again, it's just another example of why representation matters. And I keep hammering that point home. It's very important that other people that aren't in the cis, straight, white, male, like they deserve that catharsis that comes with seeing stories about yourself like that. They deserve to have that. Again, I just can't express enough. Representation matters. And
now would be a good time for me to mention that the writer of the X-Men series, Sin and Grace, is a good friend of mine and a former employee of my shop. Yes.
Really?
At my shop.
This is very exciting to me. One of my favorite other podcasts is Jay and Miles, and he's been on Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men several times, and I love listening to him.
Yeah, he pops in from time to time. My wife and I know him fairly well, and he didn't work there when I from the time that I started owning the shop. It was before that when he was younger. But yeah, he was an employee of my shop.
That's so cool. Like, I love the whole Iceman miniseries. The stuff that he did with Iceman and the with Dakin being the other antagonist and Richter coming in and I loved the entire series.
Yeah. I thought that was noteworthy.
Actually, I think I have a Iceman #1 signed by him that you can have, Ryan.
Yeah, I sent it to you.
Yeah.
I think I have more because when that came out, he came in and just signed like every copy, I think.
That's awesome.
Well, there you go. Get one from Eddie. I'm keeping mine. All right. So we're going to talk about the new Warriors. And the new Warriors feature a character named Safe Space and Snowflake, who are two brothers, and Snowflake is a non-binary black teenager, and his brother is a cis straight black teenager. And so I'm all on board to have a non-binary, which, correct me if I'm wrong, that means you're not gender neutral, but you identify both as male and female?
No, not per se. It just means that you're somewhere in between. You're somewhere on the spectrum. You don't identify as male. You don't identify as female. You're on the spectrum in between.
Okay. And I know that them and they were the pronouns that Snowflake had chosen to use, and all that's great. But they named them Safe Space and Snowflake, which are two terms that have been used against LGBTQ, and just any kind of liberal people in general as like slurs. Or no, definitely slurs.
Yes.
And so it's something that... So when the characters were first announced, the Comic Gate / alt-right came out hard against how can you have non-binary character, blah, blah, their whole hate spiel that they do every time anything upsets them came out. And that was expected. But then with Safe Space and Snowflake, the liberal side of collecting also came out against these characters because they found that, offensive. I think that you finally, the first 9 non-binary character and they're black on top of that, that's representation for somebody. And then you're almost making fun of them maybe by naming them Snowflake.
Yeah, the names are just so too much on the head that it almost comes across as parody.
I think what they're trying to do is like take those, like, claim ownership
back
things and be like, what I'm hoping that they're trying to do at least is be like, no, you can't use that against us. We're gonna take those terms back and use them in a positive way. But I think it just is a terrible misfire.
Yeah, see, and when you say take them back, all that makes me think of is a very particular Clerks 2 joke.
Sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess that's kind of gonna wrap things up for us this week. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on. This has been one of the best episodes that we've ever done, and it's because of you. So
Ryan,
we really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, Ryan.
Very flattering. Thank you.
Feel free to come back whenever you want. Eddie, thank you very much for the history lesson. And
you're welcome. And the ranting?
Oh, it's always a pleasure to listen to you rant, Eddie. All right, so that's going to do it for us for this week. We will see you soon. Goodbye.
Good night, all.
This show is part of the Geek Nerd Network. Find more shows like it at geeknerdnetwork.com. This is Janet.
Somewhere in a movie studio corporate boardroom. Okay, pitch me something good, see?
All right, there's a war. It's in the stars. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away?
That would never work. Next.
All right. So there's an alcoholic tech billionaire, and he's captured by terrorists, builds himself a robot suit to escape, then goes on adventures saving the world with Norse gods and unfrozen World War II superhero.
Boo. Next.
All right. This unknown boxer from Philly takes on the champ. Inspirational sports movie.
Not woke enough.
Okay. How about a podcast about movie franchises, how they get made, and whether the movies hold up or not?
Go on.
And we review the movies and talk about them?
I can put that on a lunchbox, and we'll call it Kiss Your Franchise Goodbye. It's the best idea I ever had.
I'm Mark.
And I'm Brooke.
And I'm Andy. Subscribe to Kiss Your Franchise Goodbye on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, or wherever you're listening now.
Join us every week along with special guests to discuss some of our favorite movie franchises and why the world seems to revolve around them.
Through November, we're discussing the films surrounding James Bond in a miniseries we're calling On Her Majesty's Secret Podcast.
Not just Bond, also Bond-adjacent movies like Austin Powers, Top Secret, unofficial Rogue Bond movies,
Atomic Blonde, The Rock, and some of these will be exclusive to GNN Network subscribers.
Join us with new episodes at the beginning of most weeks, barring any problems with our spy gear.
You expect me to podcast?
No, Bond. I expect you to
Kiss your franchise goodbye.